The Fairhaven Spring Market, once a tableau of genteel commerce, transformed into a theatre of whispers as Lady Eleanora Blackwood moved through its stalls. She glided with measured steps, her dove-grey gown, a modest choice despite her station, trailing slightly in the dust. Behind fans and gloved hands, the merchants' wives whispered, eyes narrowing as they tracked her progress. The lavender sprigs pinned at her collar trembled with each careful breath she drew. "Lady Blackwood approaches Mrs. Hempstead's booth," observed Mrs. Winfield to her companion, voice lowered to a conspiratorial hush. "One wonders why she still attends these gatherings when she can no longer show her face at proper assemblies." 3 years of marriage and not the faintest prospect of an heir," replied Mrs. Carmichael, adjusting her bonnet with a practiced flourish. "The Blackwood line shall wither and perish unless His Grace reconsiders his attachment." Eleanora's fingers tightened imperceptibly around her basket, though her countenance remained serene. The fog of early spring concealed the distant hills, yet offered no veil for her humiliation. She had endured variations of this conversation at every public gathering since her first year of marriage passed without announcement of a blessed event. "Lady Blackwood," called Mrs. Hempstead, her voice overly bright, as Eleanora approached her display of handcrafted lace. "What a pleasant surprise to see you venture out on such a dismal morning." "Mrs. Hempstead," Eleanora acknowledged with a slight inclination of her head, "your work remains unparalleled in the county. I should like to commission a set of handkerchiefs if you would be so obliged." Before Mrs. Hempstead could respond, the sharp voice of Lady Pembroke rang out across the market square. "Mrs. Hempstead, I require your immediate attention for matters concerning the spring charity ball." The lacemaker's eyes darted between her potential customer and the imperious countess. "I beg your pardon, Lady Blackwood," she murmured, already retreating. "Perhaps another time." Eleanora stood alone, abandoned as though she carried some contagion. The silence around her booth stretched painfully until, mercifully, the crowd's attention diverted to a commotion at the market entrance. Captain Thomas Winters, recently returned from service abroad, had arrived with his sister. His uniform, impeccable and adorned with medals of valor, drew admiring glances. Yet it was the pronounced limp and the cane upon which he leaned that commanded true respect, badges of sacrifice for king and country. "The captain returns a changed man," Mrs. Carmichael observed, no longer bothering to lower her voice as Eleanora stood but 5 paces distant. "Such a tragedy for one so handsome to bear such visible reminders of mortality." "Indeed," concurred Mrs. Winfield, "though not nearly so tragic as the Blackwood situation. At least the captain's afflictions bring honor." The sharp intake of breath behind them caused both women to turn. Eleanora stood, pale as alabaster, her composure fractured. For one terrible moment, it seemed she might speak, might defend herself against their barbed observations, but decorum prevailed. With a barely perceptible tremble of her chin, she turned and moved toward the secluded path that led away from the marketplace. As she passed near the Winters siblings, the captain's sister, Miss Amelia Winters, spoke in tones clearly intended to carry. "Brother, is that not the Duchess of Blackwood? They say she cannot bear an heir, poor creature. Such a burden for one of the oldest dukedoms in England." Captain Winters surveyed the scene with narrowed eyes, noting how the marketplace parted before Lady Blackwood as though she were plague-stricken rather than noble-born. His voice, when he spoke, carried the authority of battlefields. "If it is a burden, Miss Winters, then it is one shared by His Grace, who appears to bear it with considerable dignity, unlike many present who bear no burden save the weight of uncharitable tongues." A mortified flush spread across Amelia's cheeks at this rebuke. The captain, however, had already turned his attention to Lady Blackwood's retreating figure. He observed the straight line of her back, the careful placement of each step, dignity preserved despite the arrows of scorn piercing her daily existence. Later that afternoon, as Eleanora arranged violets in the solitude of her private drawing-room at Blackwood Manor, The door opened to admit her husband. Charles Blackwood, the 7th Duke of Blackwood, entered with the quiet confidence that had first drawn her to him. His dark eyes assessed her with characteristic attentiveness. "I heard of the market incident," he stated without preamble, crossing to where she stood. "Winter's sister has much to learn of discretion." Eleanora's fingers stilled among the flowers, "as have many in our acquaintance, it seems. The captain spoke well, though. I shall remember his intervention." "It changes nothing, Charles." Her voice remained steady, even as a single violet dropped from her fingers. The whispers grow louder. "Your counsel pressures you. Perhaps it is time to consider—" "Nothing," he interrupted, his tone gentle yet brooking no argument. "There is nothing to consider." He stepped closer, removing his gloves with deliberate care, a gesture reserved only for their most private moments. Taking her trembling hands in his, he guided her to set aside the floral arrangement. "Tomorrow," he said, "we shall attend the Fairhaven Chapel service together, and afterward, the Pembroke luncheon." Eleanora's eyes widened. "Charles, Lady Pembroke did not extend an invitation to me. She invited you alone." A subtle smile curved his lips. "Then it shall be most interesting when we arrive together, shall it not?" As dusk fell across Blackwood Manor, a letter arrived bearing the seal of the Duke of Malford, Charles's closest advisor and confidant. Inside lay information that could forever change their standing in society. The letter remained sealed upon the silver tray, awaiting the Duke's return from his study, where he drafted correspondence of his own, one to his solicitor, and another, most unusually, to the editor of the London Gazette. The bells of Fairhaven Chapel tolled through the morning mist as carriages assembled before its ancient stone facade. The Duke and Duchess of Blackwood's arrival caused a momentary cessation of conversation, their matched greys drawing to a halt with military precision, their driver impassive as stone beneath his livery. Charles descended first, resplendent in his Sunday attire, the gold chain of his pocket watch catching the diffuse light. With ceremonial deliberation, he extended his hand to assist Eleanora, whose emerald silk gown represented a departure from her usual subdued palette. "The Blackwoods arrive in concert," murmured Lord Pembroke to his wife, rather bold of his grace to parade her before the congregation. Lady Pembroke adjusted her prayer book with fingers adorned by hereditary rings. "He places sentiment above duty. My luncheon invitation specified his attendance alone for precisely this reason. Yet here they stand," observed Lord Pembroke, "and they shall be seated in the front pew, as befits their station." Indeed, the couple processed down the centre aisle with measured steps, Charles's hand placed protectively at the small of Eleanora's back. The congregation divided like the Red Sea, some bowing in deference to rank, others merely inclining their heads with the barest minimum of respect. None, however, could ignore the Duke's countenance, stern and unyielding as a marble sentinel. Captain Winters, positioned near the front with his sister and mother, made a point of bowing deeply as the couple passed. His eyes met Eleanora's briefly, conveying silent solidarity that brought a hint of colour to her pale cheeks. Reverend Hertford's sermon that morning concerned the parable of the barren fig tree, a coincidence so pointed that even the least observant parishioners exchanged meaningful glances. The clergyman spoke of patience and cultivation, of trees that might yet bear fruit if properly tended. Throughout the homily, Charles's expression remained inscrutable, though his hands sought Eleanora's, their fingers intertwining discreetly beneath the shield of her prayer book. As the final hymn concluded, the congregation filed outward, reforming into clusters of whispered conversation on the chapel grounds. The Blackwoods emerged into unexpected sunshine, the morning fog having lifted to reveal a sky of delicate blue. "Your Grace," called Lady Pembroke, advancing with determined steps, "I trust you received my invitation for luncheon? We anticipate your insights regarding the county magistrate appointments." Charles inclined his head, the very picture of aristocratic courtesy. "Indeed, Lady Pembroke, the Duchess and I shall be delighted to attend." A momentary silence descended, broken only by the distant call of a thrush. Lady Pembroke's smile thinned to a blade's edge. Perhaps I failed to make myself clear. The gathering concerns matters of governance, hardly suitable for ladies' sensibilities. On the contrary, Charles replied, his voice carrying just far enough to reach attentive ears nearby. The Duchess possesses a most refined understanding of administrative matters. Her father, as you may recall, served as Lord Chancellor. Lady Pembroke's colour heightened. Nevertheless, my table is arranged for a particular number. Then we shall send word ahead to accommodate one additional setting, Charles interrupted, his tone conveying that the matter was settled. Unless, of course, you wish to rescind your invitation altogether. The implied challenge hung in the air like smoke. To withdraw an invitation once extended to a duke would constitute a breach of etiquette so severe it might never be forgiven in society's unforgiving ledger. That will not be necessary, Lady Pembroke conceded, her voice brittle. We shall expect you both at 2 o'clock. As she retreated, Captain Winters approached with his characteristic halting gait, leaning heavily upon his cane. Your Grace, he addressed Charles with a military bow. Duchess, might I present my mother, Lady Winters, and reacquaint you with my sister, Miss Amelia Winters? The introductions proceeded with formal correctness, though Amelia's curtsy to Eleanora fell just short of proper depth, a detail not lost on observers. Captain Winters, Charles acknowledged, your service at Sebastopol has reached even our provincial ears. England owes you a debt of gratitude. The captain's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on his cane. England exacts payment in blood and bone, Your Grace. I merely rendered what was due. Yet not all debts are acknowledged with equal honor, Charles observed, his gaze sweeping the chapel yard where notables still gathered in judgment. I understand you've taken residence at Oakridge Cottage, temporarily, confirmed the captain, until circumstances permit a more permanent arrangement. A moment of understanding passed between the men, the unspoken acknowledgement of reduced circumstances, often following military service. You must call at Blackwood Manor, Charles said, the invitation carrying the weight of command rather than suggestion. I maintain a modest library on military history that might interest a man of your experience. Lady Winters intervened with maternal efficiency. My son would be honored, Your Grace. Perhaps next Tuesday afternoon. Perfect, agreed Charles. The Duchess and I shall expect you for tea. As the groups parted ways, Eleanora and Charles proceeded to their waiting carriage. He assisted her with formal grace, yet once seated, his demeanor softened perceptibly. You invited him deliberately, Eleanora observed, adjusting her skirts. The captain is hardly a social alliance that benefits our position. Charles's mouth quirked with rare amusement. Perhaps not in conventional terms, yet I find myself in need of men who speak truth in public marketplaces. Charles, she said, her voice lowered though they were alone in the carriage's confines, you cannot shield me from every barbed word or veiled insult. Sooner or later, you must address the council's concerns regarding succession. The Duke removed his gloves with methodical precision, revealing hands that, despite his title, bore calluses from occasional labor in his private gardens, an eccentricity tolerated due to his otherwise impeccable adherence to noble standards. Eleanora, he said, using her given name in the privacy of their conveyance, do you recall what I said the day I proposed marriage? She smiled faintly. You said many things, most rather shocking for a duke addressing a chancellor's daughter. I said, he continued, his voice deepening, that I sought a partner of intellect and character, not merely a vessel for continuation of bloodlines. The carriage wheels rumbled over the country lane, punctuating his words with rhythmic certainty. The council presses, Charles. Your cousin Frederick circles like a vulture, awaiting inheritance. Let him circle, Charles replied, reaching for her hand. I have matters well in hand. As they approached the Pembroke estate, Charles withdrew a letter from his inner pocket, the missive that had arrived the previous evening bearing the Marlford seal. Before we enter the lion's den, he said, breaking the wax seal, you should know the contents of this letter. Malford has discovered something of interest regarding your father's estates in Cornwall. Eleanora leaned forward, curiosity momentarily displacing anxiety. My father left no estates in Cornwall. All his holdings passed to my brother upon his death. Charles unfolded the letter, revealing a document that would alter their future irrevocably. Precisely, he said, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth, which makes the discovery of these particular deeds all the more intriguing. The Pembroke luncheon unfolded like a masterfully staged theatrical performance, each participant acutely aware of their role in the day's social drama. Footmen in livery moved silently between guests, filling crystal goblets and removing plates with choreographed efficiency. Lady Pembroke presided at the table's head, her husband installed at the opposite end, while 12 members of the county's elite occupied the intervening space. Eleanora found herself positioned with careful calculation between elderly Lord Harwick, nearly deaf and thus unlikely to engage her in conversation, and Mrs. Fitzhugh, whose husband's merchant wealth rendered her perpetually eager to please anyone of title, regardless of their standing in the inner circles of society. "Such lovely weather we're enjoying, Your Grace," Mrs. Fitzhugh ventured, her voice pitched to convey both deference and familiarity. "Your garden at Blackwood Manor must be coming into its glory." "Indeed," Eleanora replied with practiced calm. "The early narcissus have already made their appearance, and the cherry blossoms promise to be particularly abundant this season." Charles, seated across the table beside Lady Pembroke's unmarried niece, maintained a steady observation of his wife while engaging Lord Pembroke in discussion of county affairs. The Duke's posture remained impeccable, his attention seemingly divided between political discourse and monitoring Eleanora's reception. "I understand," interjected Lord Carlisle from 3 seats down, "that your cousin Frederick has purchased the old Winterley estate adjacent to your northern hunting grounds, Blackwood, a significant investment, particularly given its proximity to your own holdings." A hushed anticipation fell over the table. Frederick Blackwood, Charles's cousin and presumptive heir in the absence of direct issue, had made no secret of his expectation to eventually claim the dukedom. "Cousin Frederick has always displayed an admirable understanding of strategic acquisition," Charles replied, his tone betraying neither concern nor irritation, "though I confess some surprise at his investment, given recent developments." Lady Pembroke seized upon this opening with predatory swiftness. "What developments might those be, Your Grace? Surely nothing that would impact the stability of the succession." Charles lifted his wine glass, examining the ruby liquid with academic interest before responding. "Merely a matter of restructured holdings and investments. Nothing that need concern present company." The deflection was masterful, yet insufficient to deter Lady Pembroke's determination. "I understand Frederick visited London recently to consult with the family solicitors. Preparations for future responsibilities, one assumes." Charles's gaze shifted momentarily to Eleanora, who met it with composed dignity, despite the barbed implication beneath their hostess's observation. "Preparation is indeed a virtue," Charles conceded, setting down his glass with deliberate precision, "though sometimes one prepares for eventualities that never materialize." Captain Winters, invited seemingly as an afterthought due to his family's historical connections, cleared his throat from his position at the far end of the table. "Speaking of preparations, Your Grace, is it true that Blackwood Manor houses one of the finest collections of military histories outside of London? I've heard mention of rare first-hand accounts from the Peninsular campaign. The captain's intervention provided a graceful pivot from dangerous waters, though few present missed its calculated nature." Charles acknowledged the lifeline with an appreciative nod. "Indeed, Captain, my grandfather served under Wellington and maintained detailed journals. You must examine them when you call on Tuesday." Lord Pembroke, sensing the conversation slipping from his wife's control, interjected with forced joviality. "Military histories are well and good, but surely domestic matters must eventually take precedence. The Blackwood legacy spans 7 generations of unbroken succession." The silence that descended upon the table carried a weight almost physical. Eleanora's fingers tightened around her napkin beneath the table, the only outward sign of her distress. Before Charles could respond, however, a commotion at the dining-room entrance drew all attention. A Pembroke footman appeared, bearing a silver salver with an expression of evident discomfort. "Your pardon, my lord, my lady. A messenger has arrived from London with urgent correspondence for His Grace the Duke of Blackwood." Lady Pembroke's displeasure manifested in the rigid set of her shoulders. "Surely such matters can wait until after luncheon is concluded." "Forgive me, my lady," the footman continued, his discomfort visibly increasing. The messenger was most insistent. "The matter concerns the London Gazette and requires immediate attention." Charles rose with fluid grace, napkin placed precisely beside his plate. "With your permission, Lady Pembroke, duty seldom observes the niceties of social occasions." Without awaiting a response, he crossed to the footman and accepted the sealed document. Breaking the wax with his signet ring, he scanned the contents, his expression remaining studiously neutral despite the letter's evident impact. "It appears," he announced to the assembled company, "that I must beg your indulgence for an early departure. A matter of some significance requires my immediate attention in London." Eleanora made to rise, but Charles stayed her with a slight gesture. "My dear, there is no need to curtail your afternoon. Captain Winters, might I impose upon you to see the Duchess safely return to Blackwood Manor when she wishes to depart?" The captain, caught by surprise at this unprecedented request, nonetheless responded with military promptness. "It would be my honor, Your Grace." Charles crossed to Eleanora's seat, bending to speak in tones audible only to her. "Courage, my dear. All proceeds according to design." Straightening, he addressed their hostess. "Lady Pembroke, my sincere apologies for this disruption. Lord Pembroke, gentlemen, ladies." With formal bows executed to mathematical precision, the Duke withdrew, leaving behind a tableau of confusion and speculation. "Most irregular," muttered Lord Harwick, suddenly finding his voice. "A duke departing before the final course? Unheard of in my day." Lady Pembroke surveyed Eleanora with barely concealed triumph. "How unfortunate that His Grace must rush to London without you, Duchess. One hopes the matter is not too distressing." Eleanora lifted her chin, meeting her hostess's gaze directly. "My husband attends to his responsibilities with characteristic thoroughness, Lady Pembroke. It is among his many admirable qualities." The remainder of the luncheon proceeded with excruciating formality, conversation carefully steered toward neutral topics: the upcoming county fair, Lady Harwick's legendary rose garden, the bishop's plans for cathedral restoration. Throughout, Eleanora maintained perfect composure, though her mind raced with questions regarding Charles's sudden departure. As dessert concluded, a towering confection of spun sugar and fresh berries, Captain Winters approached her chair with respectful deference. "Your Grace, whenever you wish to depart, my mother's carriage is at your disposal. She and my sister have already taken their leave, but instructed the driver to return for us." Eleanora inclined her head in acknowledgement. "You are most kind, Captain. I believe I have fulfilled my social obligations sufficiently." As they took their leave, Lady Pembroke's parting words carried venomous sweetness. "Do let us know when His Grace returns, Duchess. Perhaps by then there will be news worth celebrating." The captain's jaw tightened visibly at this, though decorum prevented any reply. Outside, as he assisted Eleanora into the Winters carriage, he finally spoke his mind. "Forgive my presumption, Your Grace, but I've witnessed less vicious exchanges on battlefields." A ghost of a smile touched Eleanora's lips. "The drawing-room has its own form of warfare, Captain. One becomes accustomed to its particular wounds." As the carriage rolled away from Pembroke Manor, neither occupant noticed the rider approaching from the London road, a messenger bearing copies of the following day's London Gazette, wherein a most unusual announcement would appear under the Duke of Blackwood's seal, forever altering the whispers that had plagued Eleanora these 3 years past. The following morning dawned with unprecedented activity at Blackwood Manor. Messengers arrived in swift succession, bearing correspondence adorned with impressive seals, the Lord Chancellor's office, the Duke of Marlford, and most notably, the London Gazette. Mrs. Winters, having called ostensibly to inquire after Eleanora's health following the previous day's luncheon, observed the commotion with undisguised curiosity. "Such a flurry of communications," she remarked, delicately sipping her tea in Eleanora's private sitting room. "One might imagine a royal announcement impending." Eleanora arranged her skirts with practiced grace, revealing nothing of her own bewilderment at her husband's sudden departure. "London affairs often demand immediate attention, Lady Winters. The Duke is most conscientious regarding his parliamentary obligations." "Naturally," Mrs. Winters concurred, though her eyes glinted with speculative interest. "My son was quite impressed by His Grace's consideration yesterday. Most unusual for a duke to entrust his duchess to the care of a mere captain. Your son conducted himself with exemplary honor," Eleanora replied. "The Duke recognizes character regardless of rank." Before Mrs. Winters could respond, Blackwood Manor's elderly butler Richardson appeared at the doorway, his usually imperturbable countenance betraying distinct agitation. "Your Grace," he announced with a bow that had served 5 generations of Blackwoods, "a most unusual delivery has arrived. The London Gazette has sent a special messenger with today's edition, marked for your immediate attention." Eleanora's teacup trembled almost imperceptibly. "Thank you, Richardson. You may bring it directly." Mrs. Winters set down her own cup with deliberate slowness, making no attempt to disguise her fascination. "How extraordinary. I cannot recall the Gazette ever dispatching special messengers to provincial households." The butler returned bearing a silver salver, upon which rested the folded newspaper, its ink still faintly damp. Eleanora accepted it with outward composure, though her heart accelerated to a gallop beneath her bodice. "If you would indulge me, Lady Winters," she said, unfolding the paper with steady hands. "But of course," her visitor replied, leaning forward slightly in her chair. Eleanora scanned the front page, finding nothing of note. Her gaze moved to the second page, where announcements of peerage affairs typically appeared. There, prominently displayed in the center column, was a notice that caused her breath to catch visibly. "Is aught amiss, Your Grace?" inquired Mrs. Winters, with barely concealed impatience. "Not at all," Eleanora replied, her voice acquiring a new quality, something between wonder and vindication. "It appears my husband has made a public declaration regarding certain family matters." Mrs. Winters extended her hand impulsively. "May I?" In a rare breach of etiquette, Eleanora passed the newspaper to her visitor, who adjusted her spectacles before reading aloud the announcement that would, by nightfall, circulate through every drawing-room in the county. "Be it known," Mrs. Winters read, her voice gaining strength with each word, "that I, Charles Augustus Blackwood, 7th Duke of Blackwood, do hereby declare the formal adoption of Miss Margaret Rose Cornwall, orphaned daughter of my late cousin John Cornwall and his wife Mary Cornwall, née Williams, as my legal ward and heir presumptive to all entailed properties, not specified for male inheritance only, by special petition to the Lord Chancellor. Furthermore, I announce the establishment of the Blackwood Foundation for the education of deserving young women, to be administered by Her Grace, the Duchess of Blackwood." Mrs. Winters lowered the paper, her expression a tableau of astonishment. "Adoption? A female heir? This is unprecedented." "Not entirely," Eleanora corrected gently. "The Devonshire Amendment of 1823 permits adoption of blood relations in cases where the degree of consanguinity is sufficiently established. The Cornwall connection is distant but documented." "But what of Cousin Frederick? Surely as the male relation—" "Cousin Frederick," interrupted Eleanora, with the first hint of steel entering her voice, "has repeatedly demonstrated moral character inconsistent with the responsibilities of the Blackwood title. The Duke has made his decision." Mrs. Winters's eyes narrowed in sudden comprehension. "The Marlford correspondence yesterday, this was the matter requiring His Grace's immediate attention in London." "It would appear so," Eleanora acknowledged, reclaiming the newspaper. The Lord Chancellor's approval must have been finalized. But this child, this Margaret, where has she been all this while? I've heard no mention of her existence. Eleanora rose, moving to the window where spring sunlight illuminated the garden beyond. Cornwall was not a man of means, and his wife died in childbed. The girl has been raised at St. Catherine's School in Bath, with the Duke providing anonymously for her education these past 6 years. She is now 12 years old. And she is to be brought here? To Blackwood Manor? Mrs. Winters's tone conveyed the scandal this would inevitably provoke. She arrives tomorrow, confirmed Eleanora, turning to face her visitor with newfound serenity. The East Wing is being prepared as we speak. Before Mrs. Winters could voice the 100 questions clearly forming behind her spectacles, Richardson appeared once more. Your Grace, Lady Pembroke has arrived without prior announcement. She insists upon seeing you immediately. A fleeting smile touched Eleanora's lips. How unexpected. Please show her ladyship to the blue drawing-room, and inform her I shall attend her presently. Turning to Mrs. Winters, she added, You must forgive me, Lady Winters. It appears my social calendar suddenly overflows. Indeed, replied Mrs. Winters, rising with alacrity, I would not dream of detaining you. Thomas will call tomorrow regarding His Grace's invitation to view the military collection. As Mrs. Winters departed through one entrance, Eleanora approached another, pausing briefly before a gilt-framed mirror to compose herself. The woman reflected back at her stood straighter than she had in many months, her eyes bright with purpose, rather than dimmed by perpetual apology. Lady Pembroke awaited in thunderous silence, pacing the blue drawing-room like a caged lioness. At Eleanora's entrance, she whirled with dramatic intensity. Is it true? She demanded without preamble or greeting. Good afternoon, Lady Pembroke, Eleanora replied with pointed courtesy. What an unexpected pleasure. Do not trifle with me, Lady Pembroke snapped, brandishing her own copy of the Gazette. This proclamation, this defiance of natural succession, is His Grace quite mad? Eleanora moved calmly to the bell-pull, summoning a servant. Tea, if you please, Richardson. Lady Pembroke and I have much to discuss. Lady Pembroke's colour heightened dangerously. I do not want tea. I want an explanation for this travesty. Frederick is beside himself. He rode for London at dawn to consult the family solicitors. A wasted journey, I fear, Eleanora observed, seating herself with deliberate grace. The Duke's petition bears the Lord Chancellor's seal. The adoption is quite legal and binding. A female heir, Lady Pembroke scoffed. And what of the dukedom itself? What of the entailed properties restricted to male inheritance? Those will pass as law dictates, Eleanora conceded. Though with the bulk of the Blackwood fortune redirected to Margaret and the Foundation, the title shall carry significantly reduced circumstances. Lady Pembroke collapsed onto a settee, her outrage momentarily giving way to calculation. So, Frederick receives the hollow shell while this foundling claims the substance. The Duke provides for those he deems worthy, Eleanora stated simply. Tomorrow, Margaret arrives to begin her new life as our ward. I trust she will receive appropriate welcome from county society. Lady Pembroke's laugh held no humour. You cannot possibly believe— I believe, Eleanora interrupted with quiet firmness, that the niece and heir of a duke deserves every courtesy afforded by her station, particularly from those who have enjoyed Blackwood patronage these many years. The threat, though delicately veiled, hung in the air between them. Much of the county's social hierarchy depended on Blackwood largesse, from the lending library to the hospital wing bearing the family name. Richardson entered with the tea tray, his timing impeccable. As he poured with ceremonial precision, a messenger appeared at the drawing-room entrance bearing yet another sealed letter. From His Grace, Your Grace, the footman announced, presenting the missive to Eleanora. She broke the seal without haste, aware of Lady Pembroke's avid observation. The Duke's bold hand covered a single page, but the contents brought a flush of pleasure to Eleanora's cheeks. "It seems," she announced, refolding the letter, "that His Grace returns tomorrow with Margaret. He requests that I prepare a small reception to introduce her to key members of county society." Her gaze met Lady Pembroke's directly. "Naturally, you and Lord Pembroke shall receive the first invitation." The village of Fairhaven stirred with unprecedented excitement as news of the Duke's imminent return with his newly declared ward spread like wildfire through households high and low. By mid-morning, Blackwood Manor's circular drive accommodated a parade of carriages bearing urgent calling cards and hastily composed notes of congratulation. Those who had snubbed the Duchess but days before now clamoured to secure invitations to the reception planned for the following evening. In the great house's east wing, Eleanora supervised final preparations for Margaret's suite of rooms. The chambers, unused for a generation, had been transformed with fresh paint in soft celadon green, furnishings scaled to suit a child's proportions, and bookshelves stocked with carefully selected volumes appropriate for a young girl's education and amusement. "The botanical prints should be hung there," Eleanora directed a footman, indicating the wall opposite the windows. "And ensure the writing desk is positioned to capture the morning light." Mrs. Harding, the housekeeper, hovered nearby with an air of barely contained excitement. "Will Miss Margaret require a lady's maid of her own, Your Grace? Perhaps young Jenny from the village might suit. She has nimble fingers for hair arranging." "An excellent suggestion," Eleanora approved, "though let us wait to observe Margaret's temperament before making final arrangements. After 6 years at St. Catherine's, she may find the transition to ducal household overwhelming enough without an immediate addition to her personal staff." The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted their deliberations. Eleanora moved swiftly to the window, her heart quickening at the sight of Captain Winters dismounting in the courtyard below, his military bearing unmistakable despite his injured leg. "Please continue without me, Mrs. Harding," she instructed. "I shall receive the captain in the library." Captain Winters awaited her there, examining a glass-fronted case containing leather-bound military journals. He turned at her entrance, executing a bow of perfect precision. "Your Grace, forgive the unannounced intrusion. I've come on a matter of some urgency." Eleanora gestured for him to be seated, noting the tension evident in his bearing. "You are always welcome, Captain. How may I assist you?" The captain remained standing, his hand gripping his cane with unusual force. "I've just come from the village, where I encountered Frederick Blackwood at the King's Arms. He returned from London this morning, and has been drinking heavily while making certain proclamations regarding yourself and His Grace." A shadow crossed Eleanora's face, though her composure remained intact. "Cousin Frederick has ever been intemperate in both consumption and speech. Forgive my directness, Your Grace, but his statements go beyond mere intemperance. He claims that this adoption scheme represents a desperate attempt to legitimize a child of questionable parentage, and hints at improprieties that might explain the Duke's unusual investment in this particular orphan." Eleanora's hands clasped tightly in her lap, the only visible sign of her distress. "I see. There's more," the captain continued grimly. "He has engaged rooms at the inn rather than returning to his estate, and speaks openly of challenging the Duke's actions through legal channels. Several gentlemen of questionable character have joined his table." Rising, Eleanora moved to the window, gazing out at the carefully tended gardens that had in recent years become her sanctuary. "I appreciate your bringing this to my attention, Captain. The Duke returns tomorrow morning with Margaret. I had hoped to shield the child from immediate controversy." Captain Winters hesitated, then spoke with evident reluctance. "Your Grace, might I suggest sending word to His Grace advising him to delay his return, perhaps an alternative route to the manor, bypassing the village entirely?" "No," Eleanora replied, turning back to face him with unexpected resolution. "Charles would never countenance such evasion, nor would it serve Margaret well to begin her new life slinking through back roads like a smuggler's cargo." The captain's eyes reflected newfound respect. "What would you have me do then?" A moment of calculation passed before Eleanora responded. "First, I should like you to call upon Dr. Lansing and inform him discreetly that his services may be required should Cousin Frederick's excesses continue. Second, dispatch this invitation to Lord and Lady Pembroke for tomorrow evening's reception." She moved to the writing desk, penning the note with swift strokes. "And finally, if you would be so kind, convey my personal request that you and your family attend as well." Captain Winters accepted the sealed invitation with evident surprise. "We would be honored, of course, but may I ask why I include your family among the first invitations extended?" Eleanora finished for him. "Because, Captain, in my experience, those who speak truth in marketplaces can be relied upon to stand firm in drawing rooms as well." After the captain's departure, Eleanora withdrew to her private study, where the steward awaited with the Blackwood account books. For the next hour, she immersed herself in financial matters traditionally handled by the Duke himself, reviewing expenditures for the newly established foundation, approving architectural plans for the school to be built on Blackwood land, and signing documents that would redirect substantial portions of unentailed property to Margaret's future trust. As twilight descended, Richardson appeared with a silver salver bearing yet another urgent communication. This one, however, bore no aristocratic seal, but rather the simple direction of St. Catherine's School for Girls in Bath. "A messenger rode directly from Bath, Your Grace," Richardson explained. "The headmistress indicated it should reach you before His Grace returns." Eleanora broke the seal with suddenly trembling fingers, scanning the neat script of Miss Harriet Thornfield, headmistress of the institution that had sheltered Margaret these 6 years. The contents caused her to sink slowly into her chair, one hand rising to her throat. "Richardson," she said after a long moment, "please summon Mrs. Harding immediately." When the housekeeper arrived, breathless with haste, Eleanora handed her the letter. "It seems our preparations must be adjusted. Margaret has suffered from recurring respiratory ailments since infancy. Her chambers must be moved from the east wing to the southern exposure, where afternoon sunlight will ensure drier conditions." Mrs. Harding's eyes widened as she processed both the medical information and the logistical challenge it presented. "But, Your Grace, there are no suitable rooms prepared in the south wing except the Duchess suite adjacent to my own chambers," Eleanora completed. "Precisely. We shall convert the dressing room into Margaret's bedroom and the adjoining sitting room into her study. The connecting door shall remain accessible to both apartments." "But, Your Grace," protested Mrs. Harding, "such arrangements are highly unusual. The child would be separated from her governess." "Margaret shall have no governess," Eleanora interrupted with quiet authority. "Given her delicate health and the significant transition she faces, I have decided to oversee her education personally, at least for the initial months." Mrs. Harding's expression reflected the seismic implications of this pronouncement. A duchess personally educating an adopted ward represented a startling departure from aristocratic tradition, where such duties invariably fell to hired governesses or tutors. "As you wish, Your Grace," the housekeeper acquiesced. "I shall redirect the staff immediately." Left alone once more, Eleanora reread the headmistress's letter, attention focusing on passages describing Margaret's character and disposition. Unusually perceptive, remarkable aptitude for mathematics and natural sciences, painfully shy in group settings, yet capable of fierce loyalty when trust is established, artistic sensibility evident in detailed botanical drawings. A soft knock interrupted her contemplation. Richardson entered bearing a telegram delivered by special messenger. "From His Grace, Your Grace." The telegram's message, characteristically brief, nonetheless caused Eleanora's breath to catch. "Cornwall documents authenticated. Stop Margaret eager to meet her new mother. Stop expect us midday tomorrow. Stop prepare for possibility of Frederick's interference. Stop all my love, Charles." The word mother blurred before Eleanora's eyes. as unexpected tears gathered. 6 years of whispered judgments, of pitying glances and social isolation had prepared her for many eventualities, but not for this. The gift of a child to call her own, a daughter to nurture and guide. As darkness fell completely over Blackwood Manor, candles were lit in the Duchess' suite for the first time in months. Eleanora moved through the rooms with renewed purpose, directing the placement of furniture, selecting books from her personal collection to supplement Margaret's library, and finally, most tellingly, retrieving from storage a small music box that had been her own most treasured possession at the age of 12. The manor settled into expectant silence, awaiting the arrival that would forever transform its occupants' lives. In the village below, however, Frederick Blackwood ordered another bottle of port, his bitter declarations growing increasingly slurred as midnight approached, unaware that Captain Winters had stationed 2 trusted former comrades from his regiment at adjacent tables, monitoring every treasonous word. The London Fairhaven coach arrived precisely at noon, its wheels raising dust along the village high street as it proceeded toward the imposing gates of Blackwood Manor. Villagers paused in their daily activities, congregating with undisguised curiosity as the conveyance passed. Within the coaching inn's shadowed doorway, Frederick Blackwood observed the procession with bloodshot eyes, his companion, a sharp-featured solicitor from London, making rapid notations in a small leather-bound volume. "There goes your inheritance, delivered into the hands of a base-born pretender," the solicitor murmured, his pen scratching against paper. "If my suspicions prove correct regarding the Cornwall connection, we shall have ample grounds to contest." Frederick's response remained indistinct, though the malevolence in his gaze required no verbal articulation. He withdrew deeper into the inn's interior, where preparations of a different nature proceeded behind closed doors. At Blackwood Manor, Eleanora awaited on the front steps, arrayed in a gown of periwinkle silk that represented her first departure from mourning colours in 3 years. Beside her stood Captain Winters, invited to provide both security and a friendly face to welcome the Duke's return. The household staff formed a formal receiving line, from Richardson at its head to the youngest scullery maid, newly starched aprons and polished buttons reflecting their understanding of the occasion's significance. His Grace would never forgive a martial reception, Eleanora had explained to the captain earlier, when he suggested posting guards along the drive. "We shall proceed as though this were any homecoming, not a fortress under siege." The carriage drew to a halt, its matched greys tossing their heads as footmen rushed forward to secure the wheel chocks. The door opened to reveal Charles, resplendent in his travelling coat, looking more animated than he had in months. He descended first, turning immediately to assist his companion, a slight figure whose identity remained momentarily obscured by the carriage's shadow. Margaret Rose Cornwall emerged with tentative steps, her gloved hand clutching the Duke's with evident trepidation. She wore a travelling dress of modest brown merino, its severe lines softened only by a white lace collar. Her face, framed by neatly braided auburn hair, displayed the luminous pallor of one unaccustomed to robust outdoor activities. Yet it was her eyes that commanded attention, large, serious, and the precise shade of green that characterized the Blackwood lineage across generations. Charles guided her forward with gentle insistence, his hand placed protectively at her shoulder. "Eleanora," he called, his voice carrying across the courtyard, "may I present Miss Margaret Cornwall? Margaret, Her Grace the Duchess of Blackwood, who has long anticipated your arrival." The girl executed a perfect curtsy, precise as arithmetic. "Your Grace," she said, her voice barely audible above the fountain's gentle splashing, "I am most grateful for your reception into Blackwood Manor." Eleanora descended the steps with measured grace, extending both hands to the child. "Margaret," she replied warmly, "welcome to your new home. We have prepared chambers especially for you, taking account of your needs and preferences, as described by Miss Thornfield." At the mention of her former headmistress, Margaret's expression softened perceptibly. Miss Thornfield spoke often of your kindness, your grace. Come, Eleanora said, drawing the girl toward the entrance. You must be exhausted from your journey. Tea awaits in the conservatory, where you might enjoy the flowers while recovering your strength. Charles watched this exchange with evident satisfaction before turning to acknowledge Captain Winters. Captain, your presence suggests developments requiring my attention. Indeed, your grace, confirmed the captain, his voice lowered. Your cousin has established himself at the King's Arms, making certain proclamations that warrant discussion. Charles nodded, unsurprised. Frederick's response follows a predictable trajectory. Accompany me to my study after I've seen Margaret settled. The household staff, having been formally presented to their new charge, dispersed to their duties while Charles and Eleanora escorted Margaret through the grand entrance hall. The girl's eyes widened at the sweeping staircase and ancestral portraits, though she maintained remarkable composure for one so young experiencing such overwhelming transitions. In the conservatory, set with delicate china and spring blossoms, Margaret's reserve began to thaw as Charles recounted amusing incidents from their journey. You should have witnessed our young lady's response when Lord Hartwick attempted to patronize her regarding botanical classifications, he told Eleanora, evident pride coloring his voice. She corrected his Latin nomenclature with such precision that the poor man nearly swallowed his quizzing glass. A hint of color touched Margaret's pale cheeks. His Grace exaggerates my knowledge, your Grace. Charles and Eleanora, my dear, the Duke corrected gently. While formal address may be necessary in public settings during your early days with us, here within our home, we shall be simply Charles and Eleanora to you. The girl's fingers twisted nervously in her lap. That would be most improper, surely. Miss Thornfield emphasized appropriate forms of address when preparing me for this transition. Eleanora exchanged a glance with Charles, communicating silent understanding of the girl's distress. Perhaps, she suggested, you might begin with uncle and aunt in private, progressing to our given names as comfort permits. Margaret considered this compromise with endearing seriousness. That seems a reasonable accommodation, your Aunt Eleanora. The stilted formality with which she pronounced aunt revealed volumes about her upbringing in an institution where affectionate familial terms had likely been foreign currency. Charles rose, sensing the need for the females to establish connection without his presence. I must attend to certain matters with Captain Winters, he announced. Margaret, we shall dine at 7. Until then, you are in the most capable hands in all of England. After his departure, a momentary silence descended, broken only by the delicate clink of china as Eleanora refreshed their cups. The headmistress writes that you have particular talent for botanical drawing, she ventured at last. The conservatory contains several specimens currently flowering that might interest you. Margaret's expression brightened, animation replacing caution. Do you perhaps have a Cypripedium calceolus? I've read descriptions but never observed one directly. The lady's slipper orchid? Indeed we do. Eleanora rose, gesturing toward a glass-enclosed case housing rare specimens. Charles established this collection based on journals from the expeditions of Sir Joseph Banks. Many are quite difficult to cultivate in our climate. As they bent together over the delicate blooms, the artificial distance imposed by rank and circumstance momentarily dissolved. Margaret's knowledge, precise and scholarly, revealed a mind nurtured by dedicated educators despite her circumstances. Tomorrow, Eleanora said impulsively, we might begin cataloguing the Eastern Garden specimens. I've long intended to create a proper scientific inventory, but lacked the necessary expertise. A fleeting smile illuminated Margaret's solemn features. I should like that very much, Aunt Eleanora. Meanwhile, in the Duke's study, Captain Winters related Frederick's activities with military concision. He claims the Cornwall documents must be forgeries, as John Cornwall died without issue according to parish records he has allegedly examined. Charles removed his travelling coat, stretching travel-stiffened limbs. The records he examined would indeed show no children. John and Mary Cornwall were legally married, but 1 week before his death from fever. The child was registered under Mary's maiden name to shield her from the scandal of bearing a child mere months after the wedding ceremony. And the documentation you've secured? Incontrovertible. The marriage certificate, birth registration, baptismal record, and, most significantly, John Cornwall's deathbed letter acknowledging his paternity and requesting my protection for his child and widow. Charles extracted a leather portfolio from his desk. The Lord Chancellor has reviewed all evidence and found it sufficient to support legal adoption and inheritance rights. The captain nodded, satisfied. What of Frederick's more personal accusations? Charles's expression hardened. You refer to his insinuations regarding my relationship to the child? Precisely, Your Grace. Captain, I admire directness in military matters and social discourse alike. Allow me equal candor. Margaret Cornwall is my blood relation through documented genealogy alone. I had never set eyes upon her until yesterday morning when we met at St. Catherine's School. Her resemblance to the Blackwood line, particularly the distinctive eyes, merely confirms the legitimacy of her Cornwall connection. Before Captain Winters could respond, a commotion erupted in the entrance hall. Raised voices, hurried footsteps, and Richardson's usually measured tones elevated in protest. The study door burst open to admit Frederick Blackwood, his normally impeccable appearance disheveled, accompanied by his thin-lipped solicitor and, most alarmingly, the local magistrate, Sir William Barton. "Cousin," Frederick announced, without preamble or greeting, "I come on a matter of grave legal significance." Charles rose with deliberate calm, his posture betraying neither surprise nor concern. "Frederick, you forget yourself. This intrusion borders on criminal trespass. Necessity dictates unconventional measures," Frederick replied, his words carrying the careful enunciation of the deliberately sober. "Sir William accompanies me in his official capacity to investigate suspected fraud and falsification of legal documents." The magistrate, a florid man whose authority derived more from land holdings than legal acumen, shifted uncomfortably. "Your Grace, I must request your cooperation in examining certain documents pertaining to the Cornwall adoption." Captain Winters positioned himself subtly between the intruders and the Duke, his military bearing transforming his civilian clothing into an implied uniform. "Sir William, I believe proper procedure requires written application before executing such investigations." "Ordinarily, yes," interjected Frederick's solicitor. "However, when evidence suggests immediate action necessary to prevent irrevocable damage to inheritance rights, magistrates may proceed with expedited inquiry." Charles regarded the trio with the detached interest of an entomologist, observing particularly unpleasant specimens. "You mistake your timing, gentlemen. The documents in question reside currently with the Lord Chancellor in London, having received his official certification yesterday afternoon. Your inquiry arrives approximately 24 hours too late." Frederick's face contorted with barely suppressed rage. "You orchestrated this with deliberate haste to circumvent proper scrutiny." "On the contrary," Charles replied evenly, "the process has proceeded for 6 months with meticulous attention to legal requirement. Your own awareness comes late to the matter only because you deemed family correspondence beneath your attention while pursuing entertainments in London." The sharp rap of the door knocker interrupted this confrontation, followed by Richardson's entrance, bearing a silver salver with a sealed dispatch. "From the Lord Chancellor's office, Your Grace, delivered by special messenger who awaits your response." The Lord Chancellor's dispatch trembled in Charles's hands as 5 pairs of eyes fixed upon its unfolded contents. His expression revealed nothing as he scanned the document, though a subtle shift in his posture suggested the communication carried weight beyond ordinary correspondence. "It appears," he announced at length, "that my presence is required in London once more. The Lord Chancellor requests my attendance at an extraordinary session concerning matters of inheritance and peerage succession." Frederick's face brightened with vindictive triumph. "Justice proceeds swifter than anticipated." I shall accompany you, cousin, to ensure proper representation of secondary inheritance claims. That will not be necessary, Charles replied, refolding the dispatch with deliberate care. The summons specifies my presence exclusively, along with that of the Duchess and our ward. Captain Winters, would you be so kind as to inform Eleanora that we depart for London tomorrow morning? The captain bowed, though his exit was forestalled by Frederick's solicitor. Sir, I must advise against such departure without legal counsel. If the Lord Chancellor convenes regarding contested succession— I specified no contestation, Charles interrupted. You presume much, sir, including an invitation to continue this conversation. His gaze shifted to the magistrate, who wilted visibly beneath its intensity. Sir William, having established that the documents you seek reside with the Lord Chancellor himself, I trust your official duties here are concluded. The magistrate cleared his throat uncomfortably. Indeed, Your Grace, I shall await proper directive from higher authorities before proceeding further. Frederick's colour deepened to dangerous crimson. This is preposterous. You cannot simply dismiss legitimate inquiry with aristocratic hauteur. Yet observe how effectively it accomplishes precisely that end, Charles remarked with dangerous calm. Richardson, please see our unexpected visitors to their conveyance. Should they resist, Captain Winters has my authorization to summon the constable on charges of unlawful entry. As the trio was escorted from the study, Frederick's parting words hung venomous in the air. This matter concludes nothing, Charles. Blood will tell, as it always does. When the front door closed with definitive thud behind the intruders, Captain Winters returned to find the Duke standing at the window, his expression uncharacteristically troubled. Your Grace, shall I inform the Duchess of these developments? Charles turned, his composure restored. Please do, though with delicacy. Margaret has only just begun to acclimate to her new surroundings. This journey to London introduces further disruption. May I inquire as to the Lord Chancellor's actual communication? The captain ventured. Your response suggested contents beyond what you revealed. A ghost of a smile touched Charles's lips. Perceptive, Captain. The Lord Chancellor indeed requests our presence, not to question the adoption's legitimacy, but to finalize proceedings regarding the Foundation's charter and Margaret's formal presentation at court. The timing, however, provides convenient means to remove her from Frederick's immediate vicinity, while certain other matters resolve themselves. The captain's brow furrowed. What matters might those be, sir? The investigation into Frederick's financial improprieties that I initiated 6 months ago, Charles replied, his voice hardening. The findings should reach appropriate authorities by week's end. News of the Duke's impending departure spread through Blackwood Manor with the swiftness of flames through summer wheat. The evening's planned reception was hastily reconfigured as a farewell gathering, with Richardson dispatching revised invitations throughout the afternoon. By 7 o'clock, the grand salon blazed with candlelight, footmen positioned strategically to receive the county's most prominent families. Eleanora supervised these preparations with outward serenity, though her private conversation with Margaret regarding their journey revealed the girl's distress at facing further upheaval. "Must we depart so soon?" Margaret had asked, her voice small against the vastness of her new bedchamber. I had only just begun to memorize the pathways between rooms. "London presents its own wonders," Eleanora assured her. "The botanical gardens at Kew far surpass our modest conservatory, and you shall have opportunity to select furnishings for your permanent chambers upon our return." Now, as guests began arriving, Eleanora observed Margaret from across the salon. The girl had been attired in a gown of pale green silk, hastily altered from one of Eleanora's own youthful garments preserved in storage, her auburn hair arranged in simple braids adorned with white ribbons. She stood beside Charles, her posture reflecting the disciplined deportment instilled by institutional education, yet her eyes betrayed overwhelming anxiety at the assembled company. Lady Pembroke made her entrance with calculated delay, ensuring maximum attention as she swept into the salon at precisely 20 minutes past the hour. Her husband followed in her formidable wake, their presence representing strategic acknowledgement of the Blackwood family's unassailable social supremacy despite recent unconventional developments. "Your Grace," Lady Pembroke addressed Eleanora with exaggerated warmth, "how extraordinary to bid you farewell mere hours after welcoming your ward. London society shall be quite captivated by such an unusual addition to the Blackwood household." "London society's captivation remains perpetually of secondary concern to Blackwood priorities," Eleanora replied smoothly. "Margaret's formal introduction to the Lord Chancellor takes precedence over social calendar considerations." Lady Pembroke's gaze drifted to where Margaret stood in anxious conversation with Captain Winter's mother and sister. The child bears striking resemblance to the Blackwood line. Those distinctive eyes particularly, most remarkable in one of such distant connection. The insinuation hung perfumed in the air between them. Eleanora met it with direct gaze. "The Cornwall documents authenticate Margaret's lineage to the satisfaction of the Lord Chancellor himself. I trust that settles any curiosities you might harbour, Lady Pembroke." Before her interlocutor could formulate response, a commotion at the salon entrance heralded the arrival of Dr. Lansing, not as invited guest but as medical practitioner, his expression grave as he approached Charles with urgent whispers. The Duke's face registered momentary shock before composing into its customary impassivity. With a subtle gesture to Eleanora, he withdrew from the gathering, followed by the physician. Captain Winters materialized at Eleanora's side, his voice lowered for her ears alone. "Frederick has been found unconscious at the King's Arms, Your Grace. Excessive spirits combined with some medicinal compound, according to preliminary reports." "Is he expected to recover?" Eleanora inquired, maintaining social smile despite the gravity of this intelligence. "The prognosis remains uncertain. Dr. Lansing has requested the Duke's presence to authorize extraordinary measures, given Mr. Blackwood's status as family relation." Eleanora's gaze sought Margaret across the room, finding the girl now isolated as Lady Winters and her daughter had moved to engage other guests. With decisive steps, she crossed to her ward, drawing her gently toward a less populated corner of the salon. "Margaret, circumstances require the Duke's attention elsewhere this evening. Shall we demonstrate our capability to entertain these good people in his absence?" Margaret's eyes widened in alarm. "But I know no one, Aunt Eleanora. I should surely make grievous social errors without guidance." "You shall have guidance," Eleanora assured her, surprised by her own sudden clarity of purpose. "We shall proceed side by side, precisely as we catalogued orchid specimens this afternoon, methodically identifying and classifying each social species." This botanical metaphor elicited unexpected smile from the child. "Are some more thorny than others?" "Indeed," Eleanora confirmed, lowering her voice confidentially. "Lady Pembroke, for instance, might be categorized as Rosa spinosissima, exceptionally well armed with thorns, yet producing blossoms necessary for cross-pollination of social information." Their shared laughter, quiet though it was, drew curious glances from nearby guests, unaccustomed to witnessing the Duchess engage in any display resembling merriment. Margaret's shoulders straightened perceptibly as Eleanora guided her forward to where the Winters family had regrouped near the refreshment table. "Miss Amelia," Eleanora addressed the captain's sister, "might I impose upon you to introduce Margaret to the musical instruments? I understand you play the pianoforte with considerable skill." As the younger females withdrew toward the music room, Lady Winters regarded Eleanora with shrewd assessment. "You handle the child with remarkable intuition, Your Grace. One might almost believe you had raised daughters previously." "Margaret makes it simple through her own exceptional character," Eleanora replied. 6 years at St. Catherine's instilled admirable self-discipline, though perhaps at cost to ordinary childhood experiences." Lady Winters nodded sagely. The same might be said of many aristocratic childhoods, conducted in the shadow of grand titles and expectations. Their conversation was interrupted by Richardson's discreet approach. "Your Grace, His Grace requests your immediate presence in the library. The matter is most urgent." Excusing herself with practiced grace, Eleanora made her way through the assembled guests, maintaining serene countenance despite mounting concern. The library door stood ajar, revealing Charles in intense conversation with Dr. Lansing and, surprisingly, Sir William Barton, the magistrate who had accompanied Frederick mere hours before. "Eleanora?" Charles acknowledged her entrance with visible relief. "We face an unexpected development requiring immediate decision." Dr. Lansing stepped forward, his professional demeanor tempered by evident discomfort. "Your Grace, Mr. Frederick Blackwood's condition has deteriorated rapidly. I've administered standard treatments for opium poisoning, but without significant improvement." "Opium?" Eleanora repeated, startled. "Not merely excessive spirits?" "The spirits merely masked the compound's bitter taste," confirmed the physician. "The dosage appears deliberate rather than recreational." "Self-administered?" she inquired delicately. Sir William cleared his throat. "That remains unclear, Your Grace. Certain evidence suggests the possibility of external agency." Charles met her questioning gaze directly. "Frederick's solicitor has disappeared, along with all documentation allegedly supporting their claims against Margaret's adoption. The circumstantial arrangement proves troublingly convenient." Eleanora processed this information with remarkable clarity. "What decision requires my input, Charles?" "Frederick requires specialized medical treatment available only in London. Dr. Lansing recommends immediate transport via private carriage. As his nearest relation, I must accompany him. And our planned departure tomorrow?" Charles's expression reflected rare indecision. "Margaret's presentation cannot be delayed without raising questions we would prefer not to address. Yet I cannot be in two locations simultaneously." Understanding dawned with crystal clarity. "You wish me to proceed to London with Margaret, while you accompany Frederick in separate transport?" "Precisely. Captain Winters would provide escort to ensure your safety. We would reunite in London once Frederick's care is established." Charles hesitated, uncharacteristic uncertainty clouding his features. "It represents significant responsibility, Eleanora. Margaret's first formal presentation, navigation of Lord Chancellor protocols." "I am the Duchess of Blackwood," Eleanora interrupted with quiet dignity. "Such responsibilities constitute the very purpose of my position." She turned to Dr. Lansing. "How soon must Frederick depart?" "Within the hour, Your Grace, if he is to have reasonable chance of recovery." Eleanora nodded decisively. "Then it shall be arranged. I shall inform our guests of adjusted plans while preparations proceed." As she turned to depart, Charles caught her hand, an unprecedented public gesture. "Eleanora, this is more than I have right to ask of you." She met his gaze steadily. "On the contrary, it is precisely what you have every right to expect of the woman you chose as partner, not merely vessel." London welcomed them beneath skies of perfect cerulean blue, the late morning sunshine gilding even the grimiest facades along their route from the coaching inn to Blackwood House in Mayfair. Margaret pressed her face against the carriage window, wide-eyed at the city's tumultuous spectacle after a lifetime confined to provincial Bath. Eleanora observed the girls' wonder with quiet satisfaction, their journey having progressed with surprising harmony despite its improvised nature. Captain Winters rode alongside their carriage, his military bearing attracting occasional salutes from passing soldiers. His presence had proven invaluable during their overnight stop at the Crown and Anchor, where his discreet arrangements ensured their privacy from curious fellow travellers. "Are all those people going to visit the Lord Chancellor?" Margaret inquired, indicating the fashionable pedestrians thronging the pavements. Eleanora smiled, smoothing her travel-creased skirts. "Not precisely. London contains many diversions beyond official business. Perhaps after our appointment concludes, we might visit Hatchard's bookshop to select editions for your library." Margaret's expression brightened at this prospect. "Might we also see the British Museum? Miss Thornfield described the natural history collection with particular enthusiasm. "If time permits," Eleanora promised, though her thoughts remained fixed on the approaching audience with the Lord Chancellor, her first such official appearance without Charles at her side. Blackwood House revealed itself as they turned onto Upper Brook Street, a handsome Georgian edifice whose understated elegance belied the ancient wealth it represented. Footmen in Blackwood livery rushed forward as their carriage halted, while the housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, no relation to the captain's family despite shared surname, stood ready at the entrance, having been notified of their impending arrival via messenger sent ahead the previous evening. "Welcome to Blackwood House, Your Grace." The housekeeper greeted them with formal bow. "Chambers have been prepared for yourself and Miss Cornwall as instructed." "Thank you, Mrs. Winters. Has there been word from His Grace regarding Mr. Frederick Blackwood's condition?" The housekeeper's expression betrayed nothing beyond professional solicitude. "A messenger arrived 1 hour past, Your Grace. His Grace and Mr. Blackwood reached London late yesterday evening. Mr. Blackwood has been placed under specialized care at St. Bartholomew's Hospital. His Grace will join you at the Lord Chancellor's office at 2 o'clock precisely." Relief coursed through Eleanora at this news. "Excellent. Please have refreshments served in the morning room, while Miss Cornwall and I prepare for our appointment." Upstairs, Margaret's temporary chambers adjoined Eleanora's own suite, maintaining the arrangement established at Blackwood Manor. The girl stood uncertainly amidst trunks being delivered by footmen, her travelling cloak still fastened despite the warmth of the spring day. "Is this another temporary home?" she asked, fingers worrying the cloak's clasp. "Will we move again tomorrow?" Eleanora recognized the fear beneath the question. The institutional child's dread of perpetual displacement never permitted sufficient time to establish genuine belonging in any location. "No, Margaret," she assured her, unfastening the cloak with gentle hands. "Blackwood House represents our London residence, just as Blackwood Manor constitutes our country home. Both belong to you now as much as to the Duke and myself. Your chambers here, once properly arranged to your preferences, shall remain yours exclusively for all future London seasons." Margaret absorbed this information with characteristic solemnity. "And when the London season concludes, where shall I reside then?" "With us at Blackwood Manor," Eleanora replied, surprised by the question. "Unless you prefer to spend certain periods at school. Some young ladies find educational companionship valuable." The girl's response emerged barely audible. "I should prefer to remain with you and Uncle Charles, if that pleases you." Eleanora knelt impulsively to meet the child's gaze directly. "It pleases us greatly, Margaret. You must understand, this arrangement is not temporary charity but permanent family. The documents we sign today merely formalize what is already established in our hearts and intentions." Unexpected tears welled in Margaret's eyes, her customary composure momentarily fracturing. "Forgive me," she whispered. "Miss Thornfield cautioned against emotional displays in aristocratic households." "Miss Thornfield prepared you admirably for many aspects of this transition," Eleanora acknowledged, producing a handkerchief from her sleeve. "But perhaps she lacked certain insights regarding this particular aristocratic household." The girl accepted the offered handkerchief, dabbing her eyes with precise movements. "She said I must always remember my station and good fortune in being elevated from orphaned obscurity. Your station, Margaret, is that of cherished daughter and heir," Eleanora corrected firmly. "The good fortune, I assure you, belongs equally to those who welcome you into their family." Later, as their carriage proceeded toward the Lord Chancellor's chambers in Westminster, Eleanora reviewed essential protocol with Margaret regarding their impending interview. The girl absorbed instructions with characteristic attentiveness, asking pertinent questions that revealed her comprehensive preparation by St. Catherine's headmistress regarding aristocratic procedures and expectations. "And I shall curtsy to the Lord Chancellor precisely as I would to a duke," she confirmed, rehearsing the movement within the carriage's confines. "Exactly so," Eleanora approved. "The Lord Chancellor's authority derives from the crown rather than hereditary title. yet commands identical respect in formal settings. Captain Winters, seated opposite, regarded this exchange with undisguised admiration. Miss Cornwall demonstrates remarkably swift adaptation to her new circumstances, Your Grace. Margaret possesses natural aptitude for systematic learning, Eleanora replied. A quality the Duke particularly values, and one that shall serve her well in future responsibilities. As their carriage joined the queue approaching the imposing edifice housing governmental offices, another vehicle drew alongside, a physician's conveyance bearing Charles's unmistakable figure. At Eleanora's gesture, their driver halted, allowing the Duke to transfer between carriages with minimal public observation. "Charles," Eleanora greeted him, noting the fatigue evident in his features. "How fares your cousin?" "Stable, though recovery remains uncertain." Charles settled beside her, inclining his head to Captain Winters before turning attention to Margaret. "You appear admirably composed for one about to face the Lord Chancellor of England, young lady." Margaret straightened her already impeccable posture. "Aunt Eleanora has prepared me thoroughly, sir. I shall endeavour not to disappoint." Something in the child's earnest declaration brought unmistakable tenderness to Charles's expression. "You could never disappoint us, Margaret. Today merely formalizes what Providence has already ordained, your rightful place within our family." The Lord Chancellor's antechamber bustled with legal functionaries and aristocratic petitioners when they entered, their arrival creating momentary disruption in established patterns of deference. The Duke of Blackwood's presence commanded automatic respect from all present, clearing their path toward the Master of Ceremonies, who controlled access to the Chancellor's private offices. "Your Grace," this functionary acknowledged with deferential bow, "the Lord Chancellor anticipates your arrival. If you would follow me, please." Lord Harewood, serving his second term as Lord Chancellor, rose from behind his massive oak desk as they were announced, extending both hands in greeting. "Blackwood," punctual as always, "and this must be the young lady whose documentation I reviewed with such interest." Margaret executed her curtsy with mathematical precision, rising only when the Chancellor extended his hand to assist her. "My Lord Chancellor, I am honored by your attention to my humble case." "Humble?" The Chancellor raised bushy eyebrows in mock astonishment. "My dear child, the Cornwall-Blackwood adoption represents the most significant transfer of aristocratic inheritance rights this decade. Nothing humble about securing your future as one of England's wealthiest heiresses." As they seated themselves in leather chairs arranged before the Chancellor's desk, Charles maintained formal posture while addressing the proceedings' central purpose. "All necessary documentation has received your preliminary approval, I understand. We come today to execute final signatures establishing Margaret's legal status and the Foundation's charitable charter." "Indeed." The Chancellor extracted a leather portfolio from his desk drawer. "Though certain developments require discussion before proceeding." Eleanora tensed at these words, sensing potential complications. Charles, however, appeared unsurprised. "You refer to my cousin's sudden incapacity and its suspicious timing." "Precisely." The Chancellor steepled his fingers, regarding Charles intently. "Sir William Barton forwarded his preliminary findings by special messenger. The circumstances suggest deliberate intervention rather than self-administered misadventure." "The solicitor remains missing?" Charles inquired. "Departed for the continent yesterday morning, according to port authorities." The Chancellor's gaze shifted to include Eleanora. "These developments necessitate expedited formalization of Margaret's status. Should your cousin's condition deteriorate further, questions might arise regarding succession manipulations, regardless of circumstantial evidence suggesting external agency in his current state." Eleanora spoke for the first time since entering the chamber. "You suggest Frederick's condition might be misconstrued as convenient elimination of succession obstacles? Politics and aristocratic inheritance frequently inspire uncharitable interpretations," the Chancellor confirmed grimly. "Best to establish Margaret's legal position definitively before such whispers gain traction." The Chancellor turned his attention directly to Margaret, his stern countenance softening. "Young lady, do you understand the significance of these proceedings? The responsibility that accompanies your new position?" Margaret met his gaze steadily, her voice clear despite the intimidating surroundings. "I understand that I am being granted extraordinary privilege, my Lord Chancellor. Aunt Eleanora has explained that with such privilege comes obligation to utilize resources for worthy purposes, particularly through the educational foundation being established." The Chancellor's bushy eyebrows rose appreciatively, remarkably well stated for one so young. His gaze returned to Charles. "She possesses the Blackwood clarity of expression, I see." "Margaret's natural gifts require no aristocratic pedigree to explain their excellence," Charles replied. "They exist through her own merit and dedicated instruction at St. Catherine's." The Chancellor nodded, extracting formal documents from the portfolio. "Let us proceed then. The adoption deed requires signatures from both yourself and the Duchess as joint legal guardians. The Foundation Charter establishes the Duchess as primary administrator, with Margaret assuming graduated responsibilities upon reaching appropriate milestones of maturity. As quills scratched against parchment and red wax pooled beneath official seals, Eleanora experienced sudden, profound recognition of the moment's historical significance. They were not merely securing one child's future, but establishing precedent that might influence aristocratic adoption practices for generations hence. When the final document received its seal, the Lord Chancellor rose with ceremonial gravity. "By the power vested in me by His Majesty's government, I hereby confirm the legal adoption of Margaret Rose Cornwall as ward and heir of Charles Augustus Blackwood, 7th Duke of Blackwood, and his wife, Eleanora Catherine Blackwood, Duchess of Blackwood. May this union prove beneficial to family and nation alike." Margaret's face, as she accepted the Chancellor's formal blessing, shone with emotions too complex for simple classification. Relief, wonder, and cautious joy intermingled beneath her careful composure. Yet it was the subtle reaching of her hand toward Eleanora's that truly marked the day's most significant achievement, a gesture of trust from one who had learned early that trust represented life's most precious and precarious currency. 5 years passed with the swift certainty of changing seasons, each one adding layers to the story begun that spring day in Fairhaven Market. Blackwood Manor's East Wing, once silent and shrouded, now echoed with the ordered commotion of young female scholars, 30 girls of varied circumstances, united by uncommon intellectual promise and the patronage of the Blackwood Foundation for the education of deserving young women. On this particular autumn afternoon, golden light slanted through tall windows, illuminating the Foundation's central library, where Margaret, now 17, supervised a group of younger students, cataloguing botanical specimens collected during morning expeditions. Her auburn hair, fashioned in a simple chignon, caught copper highlights as she moved between workstations, offering guidance with patient authority that belied her youth. "Excellent classification, Miss Harrington," she approved, examining a pressed specimen of marsh orchid, "though I believe the secondary characteristics suggest Dactylohizia praetermissa rather than Dactylohizia fuchsii. Observe the labellum's distinctive patterning." The student, daughter of a country physician whose modest means would never have permitted such education without the Foundation's intervention, leaned closer, her expression brightening with discovery. "You're absolutely right, Miss Blackwood. The central lobe extends further than in common spotted orchid varieties." Eleanora observed this exchange from the library entrance, her heart swelling with quiet pride. The transformation in Margaret these 5 years measured far beyond physical maturation, though she had indeed blossomed into a young woman of striking appearance, her Blackwood green eyes now complemented by graceful carriage and self-possessed demeanor. More significant was her evolution from anxious institution-shaped child to confident young scholar, whose natural leadership abilities flourished in an environment that valued her intellectual gifts. "She conducts herself admirably," remarked a voice at Eleanora's elbow. Lady Winters, who had become both friend and stalwart Foundation supporter these past years. One would never guess her unconventional path to current station. Margaret creates her own conventions, Eleanora replied. Charles believes she may well prove the most significant Blackwood of this century, regardless of her adoptive status. The library door opened to admit Captain Winters, now Major Winters, his military career having advanced steadily, despite his physical limitations. He executed a formal bow to both ladies before addressing Eleanora. Your Grace, His Grace requests your presence in the East Garden, a matter of some significance, I understand. Eleanora excused herself, following familiar corridors toward the garden that had, over these transformative years, evolved from her private sanctuary into the Foundation's living botanical laboratory. Students in neat uniforms of forest green moved purposefully between greenhouse and planting beds, notebooks in hand as they documented horticultural experiments under experienced gardeners' supervision. Charles awaited beside the central fountain, deep in conversation with a distinguished gentleman whose diplomatic uniform and foreign decorations suggested continental diplomatic service. At Eleanora's approach, both men turned, Charles extending his hand in greeting. My dear, may I present Baron von Hazelberg, cultural attaché to the Prussian embassy. The Baron brings intriguing proposals regarding potential expansion of our educational model to institutions in Berlin and Vienna. The diplomat bowed formally over Eleanora's offered hand. Your educational philosophy has attracted significant attention throughout Europe, Your Grace. The combination of rigorous scientific instruction with practical administrative training represents precisely the model progressive elements within our educational ministries wish to implement. The Duchess deserves full credit for the Foundation's curriculum, Charles acknowledged, his expression reflecting undisguised admiration. Her vision transformed what might have been merely another finishing school into something genuinely revolutionary. As their discussion continued, detailing possible exchange programs between Blackwood students and European counterparts, Eleanora found her attention momentarily drawn toward the manor house where Margaret had appeared at an upper window. The girl, young woman now, she corrected mentally, stood observing their gathering with characteristic thoughtful expression, her posture reflecting the quiet dignity that had become her hallmark. The Baron expresses particular interest in our botanical research protocols, Charles explained, reclaiming her attention. Apparently our classification system for native orchid varieties has attracted notice from scientific circles in Berlin. Margaret's system, you mean? Eleanora clarified. Her monograph on British Orchidaceae established the organizational principles we employ. The diplomat's eyebrows rose appreciatively. Your daughter published this monograph, most impressive for one so young. The simple phrase, your daughter, still carried power to arrest Eleanora momentarily, even after 5 years of legal adoption, not from discomfort, but from profound recognition of Providence's unexpected gifts. What had begun as Charles's strategic maneuver to thwart Frederick's succession aspirations had evolved into the most precious relationship of her life. Frederick himself had recovered physically from the mysterious overdose, though the incident's suspicious circumstances and his solicitor's permanent disappearance to the continent had effectively neutralized any challenge to Margaret's adoption. He now resided primarily abroad, his allowance from the Blackwood estate sufficient for modest comfort, but inadequate for the dissipations that had previously characterized his lifestyle. As afternoon shadows lengthened across carefully tended garden beds, the Baron took his leave, escorted to his waiting carriage by Charles. Eleanora remained by the fountain, her fingers trailing through cool water as she contemplated the day's significance. 5 years ago precisely, the London Gazette had published Charles's declaration regarding Margaret's adoption, the catalyst that had transformed whispers of Eleanora's barrenness into celebration of her unexpected maternal legacy. The Foundation's success had gradually silenced even the most persistent critics, as aristocratic families throughout England now competed for their daughters' admission to what had become the nation's most progressive female educational institution. She was so absorbed in reflection that Charles's return went momentarily unnoticed until his hand covered hers in the fountain's basin. "Lost in administrative calculations?" he inquired, his voice carrying the gentle teasing that had, over time, become characteristic of their private interactions. "Remembering, rather," she corrected. 5 years today since the Gazette announcement." Charles nodded, understanding immediately. 5 years since she cannot bear an heir, transformed from curse to catalyst, their hands entwined in the water, wedding rings catching afternoon light. "I never asked," Eleanora ventured, "when precisely you conceived the foundation plan. Was it always intended as accompaniment to Margaret's adoption, or did one inspire the other?" "They were inseparable from inception," Charles acknowledged. "The whispers about your barrenness had long disturbed me, yet conventional solutions, divorce, separate living, designated heir from male relations, all seemed fundamentally unjust given your qualities as partner and potential mother. So you created unconventional solution instead. I merely recognized opportunity when John Cornwall's posthumous letter regarding Margaret reached me," Charles clarified. "The foundation concept emerged from our conversations about educational inequity, your passion for scientific instruction, for women particularly. The manor door opened to admit Margaret, now attired for evening in a gown of deep burgundy, her academic pinafore replaced by more formal attire, appropriate for dinner with the Foundation's Board of Governors scheduled that evening. "There you are," she called, approaching with the graceful confidence of assured belonging. "The governors have begun arriving. Lady Pembroke appears particularly eager to discuss the Vienna exchange proposal. News travels with remarkable efficiency," Charles observed wryly. The Baron departed scarce 30 minutes past. "Lady Pembroke maintains informants throughout diplomatic circles," Margaret replied with adult understanding of social mechanics. "Her niece's potential selection for the exchange provides powerful motivation for current enthusiasm." Eleanora rose, smoothing her skirts with practiced motion. "We should not keep the governors waiting, then. Margaret, would you please ensure Professor Hamilton's research presentation is properly arranged in the library? I believe his microscope requires particular illumination." As Margaret departed to execute this request, Charles offered his arm to Eleanora with formal courtesy that had over years of partnership transcended mere social convention to become genuine expression of respect. "Sometimes," he observed as they walked toward the manor, "I find myself marveling at how completely she has transformed from institutional orphan to confident young intellectual. You accomplished miracles with her education, Eleanora." "We accomplished it together," she corrected gently. "Your belief in her capabilities provided foundation upon which all else was built." They paused at the entrance, autumn's golden light bathing the limestone facade in honeyed warmth. Above the doorway, the Blackwood coat of arms had been subtly modified 5 years prior, a small addition representing the educational foundation now incorporated into the ancient heraldry. The modification had raised eyebrows among certain traditionalists, yet now stood as visible symbol of family redefined through choice, rather than mere bloodline. Inside, the entry hall bustled with arriving governors and academic advisors, Margaret moving confidently among them, with perfect hostess comportment, despite her youth. Lady Pembroke, now among the Foundation's most vocal supporters, despite initial skepticism, engaged her in animated conversation regarding the Vienna exchange, while Professor Hamilton from Edinburgh University displayed microscope slides to interested observers near the library entrance. Watching this tableau, Eleanora experienced sudden, profound recognition. The whispers that had once wounded her so deeply had transformed into celebration of achievement never imagined during those painful years of perceived failure. Barrenness, once her defining characteristic in society's cruel accounting, had become merely a relevant footnote to legacy far exceeding conventional aristocratic succession. "Shall we join them?" Charles inquired, his hand warm against hers. "In a moment," Eleanora replied, savoring this interval of private reflection. "I was just thinking how completely the narrative has changed." Charles's gaze followed hers to where Margaret now demonstrated botanical classification principles to an attentive circle of governors, her intelligent animation drawing even the most conservative members into her enthusiastic explanation. "Indeed," he agreed, his voice carrying quiet satisfaction. "They once whispered, 'She cannot bear an heir.' Now they seek to replicate our model throughout Europe." Eleanora turned to face him directly, finding in his expression the same steadfast certainty that had sustained her through their journey from whispered scandal to celebrated innovation. "You told them you married for love," she reminded him. "Few believed such sentiment sufficient justification for maintaining our union. Yet here we stand," Charles replied simply, "with family and legacy exceeding anything bloodline alone might have provided." As they moved forward together to join their assembled guests, Eleanora reflected that perhaps this represented love's truest definition, not merely emotional attachment or physical passion, but the courage to envision possibility where convention perceived only limitation. In transcending society's narrow definition of family, they had created something far more enduring than mere succession, a legacy of minds nurtured, knowledge advanced, and lives transformed through education's liberating power. The whispers had fallen silent long ago, replaced by voices raised in scholarly discourse and appreciative recognition, and Margaret, once an orphaned girl of uncertain prospects, now stood poised to carry the Blackwood name into future generations, not through blood inheritance, but through intellectual legacy that would, in time, reach far beyond England's shores to transform educational possibilities for young women throughout Europe and beyond. In the silence of our deepest struggles often lies the seed of our greatest purpose. When society condemns our perceived failings, it is not the whispers themselves that define us, but rather how we transform them into something meaningful. The Duchess could not bear a child, yet she bore something far greater, a revolution in education, a transformation in what it means to create legacy. The Duke, faced with convention's narrow path, chose instead to redefine nobility as character rather than bloodline. Together they showed us that true inheritance is not what flows through our veins, but what we build with our hands and hearts. Perhaps the truest nobility lies not in preserving what came before, but in having the courage to create what has never been. When we face the world's harsh judgment about what we cannot do, we are presented with an opportunity to redefine what we can. In this story, what seemed a curse became a catalyst, and what appeared to be an ending became a beginning. We are reminded that our perceived limitations, when embraced with courage and reimagined with vision, can become the very foundations upon which we build our most meaningful contributions to the world. Did this story touch your heart? Subscribe to continue our journey through tales of transformation, courage, and unconventional wisdom. Share your thoughts in the comments below. How have you transformed life's whispers of cannot into powerful declarations of I shall? Your story matters as much as those we tell.